clear of the closing doors, please.
Welcome to Subway Sports Talk. My name is Peter Kennedy, and I am your host. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning into SST on Apple Podcast app, Spotify, and on YouTube. As always, I got to remind you guys real quick, don't forget to subscribe, rate, review on the podcast app if you're choosing. That be Apple, that be Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as subscribe, hit the notification bell on YouTube so you know when we drop new videos as well. Social media game has been pumped up just a little bit lately, trying to get some more content out there, some more stuff to keep that conversation going. So hit us on social media at Subway Sports Talk on Instagram and TikTok, at Subway Sports Talk TLK on Twitter, because they don't let us have enough characters in there. Another thing about Twitter, maybe just blowing it. Maybe just a little, I don't know. I don't really care. Threads, yeah, that's a thing. That's a live thing that's happening. I'm thinking about it. Not that much, because I'm thinking about other stuff. Because we got to talk about some sports here, as we do right here on Subway Sports Talk. And yeah, it's time for a New York Minute. I'm here solo today on the podcast. I'm here to talk about all of our favorite New York sports teams. Now, I've given some good recognition and thought and conversation to the New York Knicks as of late. Had Cody O'Connor on. We talked about all of NBA free agency and post-draft moves and moving the needle or not moving the needle. Go check out that podcast if that tickles your fancy. We do talk Knicks a good bit on it. But we have to talk about some other stuff. More pressing New York Minute stuff. And honestly, some stuff that's not super pressing, but it's about the time of the year for us to start thinking about it a little bit more seriously, and that is the NFL and our Jets and our Giants. Especially with the recent news that the New York Jets will be this year's Hard Knocks team. It's a perfect time to start thinking about it, to start calibrating what we believe is possible for the Jets, for the Giants, and etc. Because there's a lot to be said about the Hard Knocks teams of past. There's a lot to be said about distraction and the camera crews being deep in everybody's business, and if that's going to be a positive or negative for this team. Obviously, the Aaron Rodgers thing, such a huge change, big name, big-time player who is going to grab the attention of a lot of people, not just in New York. And frankly, if you think about the Jets and Giants in recent history, they haven't really been grabbing the attention of the nation super frequently, right? The Giants had some nice juice last year. They surprised some folks. They made the playoffs. They won their playoff game before getting crushed by the Eagles, right? But there wasn't a lot of national juice where people were saying the Giants are going to make this crazy run and do all these things. There were some great things that came out about the Jets' defense last year and how good of a unit that was. But still, not really making that much national noise, not bringing that much juice to the table. Obviously, their quarterback situation, or lack thereof, last year was a bigger talking point, perhaps sprinkled through the national news because of the Zach Wilson fiasco. He's still on the roster, but Aaron Rodgers is in town. He is the biggest star in New York, and maybe not New York's biggest star. We'll still give that to Aaron Judge, but he is the biggest star in New York. So with all that being said, there's tons of things to talk about right now with the Jets and the Giants. We're going to talk a little bit, we're going to base it around the over-under totals for the Jets and Giants. Jets at 9.5, Giants at 7.5. Little division odds, a little scheduling look through, if you will, because it's about that time. We're almost in mid-July, we are in mid-July. And before we know it, we're going to start our fantasy drafts. We're going to start putting in our future bets for the NFL. We're going to start really looking at a lot of these rosters as more and more news comes out and cut days come up after camps open and preseason games are around the corner, right? So all these things are super exciting, and we're going to talk about that with the Jets and Giants as part of our New York Minute. But to start off said New York Minute, let me just say this. If you don't know what a New York Minute is, maybe you ain't from New York. New York Minutes aren't quick, bro. New York Minute to get from Soho up to the west side, Upper West Side. That's going to take a long time. You might only be traveling 2.2 miles, but it might take a little bit, right? So right here on the New York Minute, we're going to work through all of our New York sports here. We're going to talk about the Mets and the Yankees into their second half push, what they have to do to make the playoffs, which even just saying it out loud right now for the Mets feels like a crazy thing to talk about, but we will give it some due diligence. We will discuss it. We will talk about what could or could not be. And same for the Yankees, because right now, if the season ended today, the Yankees are not in the playoffs. Now, I don't know when the last time was that the Yankees at the All-Star break were not a playoff team, but they're currently not. They're only one game out. Two of the teams ahead of them happen to be in the AL East, which is the best division in baseball. That's the Orioles and Blue Jays, and then the Houston Astros, longtime foe of the New York Yankees here, big-time thorn in the side of the New York Yankees. They're also ahead of them. They're also right there. Now, you look at the AL West, they're only 2 games back behind the Texas Rangers. Rangers have been a bit of a juggernaut this year offensively. They're putting up absolute numbers right now. Over 530 runs scored on the year, which is the most in baseball. So their offense has been elite, and that's pretty much unquestionable. But Jacob deGrom is out for the year. Will that hitting maintain? They've lost 7 out of 10 going into the All-Star break. So we'll keep an eye on if it's going to be the Astros that they're competing for a wild card spot with, or if it's going to be the Rangers. Nonetheless, there's currently 3 teams slotted in to the wild card ahead of the New York Yankees. For the Mets' perspective, it's not as good, right? We can sit here and criticize the Yankees for being 1 game out of a wild card spot. Well, guess what? The Mets are 7. The Mets are 7 games out of a wild card spot. And there are 4 teams between them and number 3, which means to get to number 3, they will have to jump 5 teams to get into a wild card spot. Who are all the teams in contention here? And some of these are a little bit tricky because of the division leaders, not being, big time leaders at the moment. But right now you got the Marlins and the Phillies in their own backyard who are ahead of them by 6 and 10 games respectively. In the NL East alone. Then in the Central, that's a pretty bad division right now, generally. You got the Reds and Brewers, the only 2 teams truly in that contention right now. The Cubs are in a more similar place, along with the Pirates, to the Mets. And then in the West, you got the Dodgers and Diamondbacks basically tied right now for the division lead. But basically, that's the gist of the teams that are ahead, without a doubt. The San Francisco Giants also ahead, without a doubt. One of those other teams in the wild card running ahead of the Mets. So specifically right ahead of the Mets currently as we speak, you got the Chicago Cubs, San Diego Padres, Milwaukee Brewers, Phillies, Giants, Diamondbacks, and Marlins. That's what the wild card standings look like right now. So the Mets have to jump 5 of those teams. That's no matter how you look at it, no matter how good you expect them to play, they still have to get ahead of 5 different teams. Some of those teams, starting at the Giants, Phillies, and Brewers, are 6 games or more ahead of the Mets in the standings. So not only do they have to jump 5 teams, where the Cubs and Padres are only a game or game and a half or a half game ahead, they got to jump 6 games on some of these teams. So let's see if this is possible. Because I can sit here and talk till I'm blue in the face about the Yankees roster and their shortcomings, the Mets roster and their shortcomings, and the pitching staff and the bullpen, and if they should make moves and who they should go get. We've done that. We did it just a week and a half ago with Alec and Andrew, talking about the MetLife crisis that we're in right now, talking about the Yankees and, frankly, their more mediocre standing as a franchise that they've been in, which I didn't like the word mediocre. Let me just be frank about that. I'm the Mets fan here, so I instantly can get pushback by being a Met fan, Yankee hater. That is not really who I am. I was more pro-Yankees than the 2 Yankees fans, if I'm being quite honest, and I get it. It's because of the climb to the top that they've been on for 6-7 years now that has produced nothing but devastating playoff losses. That's where the Yankees are at. They're not mediocre when you count 1 through 30. They're mediocre on Yankee standards amongst the top tier. The way we finally came to a conclusion after a long debate, which was honestly very fun, they are at the bottom of the top tier, which is a place that the Yankees don't want to be. They want to be at the top of the top tier, obviously, as does everyone. We can talk about how their lineup is just not going to cut it, perhaps, but we're not going to do that. We're going to talk more about how they specifically match up moving forward and what they have to accomplish, and same for the Mets. So right now, the Mets have a bunch of games left here against those teams that I mentioned before that they have to outplay, some of them by a wide margin, to make the playoffs. Is it possible? Let's go through it. Remaining in division matchups, just the NL East that the Mets have remaining on the second half of the schedule. If you remember from the preseason, looking at the schedule, it was really weird and really easy to see how awkward the scheduling was for many teams, but especially the Mets. They played the Phillies early on in the year, maybe once more towards the middle, and then they don't play them all the way down until they get to the bottom half of the season. They play the Phillies at the end of the season 7 times in their final 10 games. 7 times in 10 games. And 7 games remaining against the Phillies. Who knows where they'll both be at that point, but 7 incredibly important games against the Phillies. They also have 6 games against the Marlins. Those also happen to be jammed at the end of the season. So from September 18th to October 1st, which is the last game of the regular season, the Mets only play the Marlins and Phillies. That could be a positive if the Mets do have a way of climbing back and getting a little bit closer to this race, and the Marlins and Phillies are the teams that are still ahead of them. Those games are incredibly important. Again, September 18th to October 1st, the final 2 or so weeks of the season. You got 6 against the Marlins and 7 against the Phillies. They also have mixed in the second half here, 7 against the Braves. Those are a little bit earlier on. We'll see the Braves in about a month and then see them in about 6-7 weeks. Okay? Those games are important. There's 26 in-division games for the Mets remaining on the schedule. 26. And we can sit here and say, oh, they have to go, 18-8 in order to do this. Sure, we can do that. The fact of the matter is the Mets have to outplay a lot of these teams by a wide margin, but they also really have to take care of business against the Marlins and Phillies. And there's a chance that those games mean nothing. That the 7 against the Phillies and 6 against the Marlins, there's a chance that those mean nothing by the end of the season. But there's a chance that that's a make or break opportunity for the Mets to unmets themselves and make up for all those years where they were the division lead and blew it in the final month, where they were looking like a wild card and they missed the playoffs in the final month. If they take care of business against the other teams I'm going to get into in a second here, they might actually mean something in September and the first day of October. Now, the other teams that they play here in the second half that are relevant games. I didn't count all the games. There's a bunch of American League matchups that they're going to go through. They play the White Sox, the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Royals, the Orioles. They play some American League teams, the Angels, Rangers, Mariners, Twins, whatever. Those are important. You got to get fat where you can. You got to win where you can. Every single game from here on out for the Mets is important. But even more so, you have to take care of business against those teams that are ahead of you in the standings. So outside of the NL East, they have 3 versus the Reds, 3 versus the Dodgers, 3 versus the Cubs and Pirates, 4 versus the Cardinals, and 4 versus the Diamondbacks. All right? So that's 20 games against other NL opponents, all within this race. The Dodgers and Diamondbacks, one of them will make the playoffs based off where the standings are right now. They're practically in a tie, so who's to say which one's a wild card, which one isn't? The Giants, they do not play in the second half, but they're obviously a player in this game. Same goes for the Padres. With the Diamondbacks and Dodgers, perhaps less of the worry. Because it seems like, based off where they're at today, possibly both of those teams. Obviously, we have more faith in the Dodgers based off of who they are, what they've accomplished, and what their roster looks like to win the NL West. So maybe it'll be the Diamondbacks. They don't play, actually, they do play them for 4 games towards the later part of the season. In the Central, though, this is a spot where you have to take advantage. The Central is not a good division. The leader of the Central would currently be 3rd in the NL East. That's the Cincinnati Reds. Mets don't play them. But they do play the Brewers. They do play the Cubs, and they do play the Pirates, and they do play the Cardinals. All teams that, when you look at those series, you have to win those series, and you have to sweep one of them. You can talk about matchups. You can talk about if the Mets are better than these teams. Well, there's a weird thing going on with the Mets right now. There's a weird thing going on with the Mets all year. When you look at the rosters, when you look at the pitching matchups, when you look at the Vegas odds on each specific game, somebody out there is still putting stock in this Mets team. Somebody out there is still saying the Mets should be favored in a lot of these matchups. If you don't trust me, you don't believe me, go to FanDuel, go to DraftKings, go to these teams, go to these matchups, see what the odds are for the Mets. Because I'll tell you right now, they're favored in a lot of games, and a lot of those games feels like they shouldn't be. Now, against the Dodgers, that's not a team that you're specifically going to be favored against. But you look at the Cubs and the Pirates and the Cardinals and even the Diamondbacks, who were the division leader when the Mets went to play them and the Mets knocked them around. The Mets are favored in all those games. You look at the Phillies, it's usually a wash. You look at the Marlins, probably a wash. Obviously, against the Braves, they'd be underdogs in a lot of those matchups. But there's still a reason to believe that the Mets are favored in a lot of these games. And you look at why or why not, it's kind of hard to figure out sometimes. It's kind of difficult when you look at the stats and you see underwhelming performances from a lot of important guys on both of these teams. On the Mets team. You see Starling Marte and Daniel Vogelbach still with negative WARs on the season, yet they've been doing a little bit more as of late. Tommy Pham, who has been by far the best hitter on this team in most of the season. Obviously, for the last month or two, he's been the best hitter on the team, but he also now officially is the best hitter on this team from a statistical standpoint for the entire season, which if you told me that before the season, I'd say, yeah, they're probably going to be 10 games under 500. And that's where they're at. But Alvarez's bat has come hot. Pete Alonso has to step up and be the star of this team. Lindor has had some incredible moments, and since the birth of his daughter, man, he's been ripping. Jeff McNeil is such a professional hitter that you can expect something out of him. Nimmo's been okay this year. He's been decent. And Lindor actually said it very eloquently when they asked him about getting into the All-Star game. He goes, hey, it might have to be Nimmo actually who we're pulling for here because he might be the better player this year. So you look at this lineup and every single day you say, there's hits here. There's opportunity to drive in runs here. There's chances to score. There's chances to be the team that we expected them to be. But based off the performances so far this year, the hitting hasn't hit when the pitchers pitch, and the pitchers haven't pitched when the hitters hit. That's been the story of the Mets year. The lineup is not what I'm worried about. They can put up runs. Their bats have come alive. We know over the last 2 weeks before the All-Star break, they played some better baseball. They knocked a few games off that record from below 500 to slightly less below 500. They got to pitch. They got to do it. They need to step up, and you need to see it out of Scherzer and Verlander. And that's what it comes down to. Kodai Senga's been the most consistent pitcher out of this bunch so far this year. He's been fine. He's been solid. He's been kind of what you expect from a new MLB player. He's a rookie. He made the All-Star team, which didn't really make a ton of sense, but it's okay. He has stuff that's electric. He's been solid. If he can continue to be solid, to continue to give his team a chance to win, that's what you want out of your third spot pitcher. It comes down to Scherzer and Verlander, and it comes down to Ottavino, Brooks Raley, David Robertson. Those three guys have to be special. Raley and Robertson have been pretty special. Ottavino, not as much. Drew Smith, not as much. Trevor Gott, he's new. We'll see what he's got in the tank. Pun intended. The pitchers have to pitch well. And if you're going to compete with the Phillies, you're going to compete with the Marlins, you're going to have to score runs. The Marlins haven't scored a ton of runs this year. They're still in a negative run differential, -5 for the year, so just about even. That's not a team that I particularly trust. The Marlins have had a nice year. They're currently out-kicking their coverage. They are 14 games above 500 with a team and a roster that's not incredibly impressive. They don't look like a team that's going to run to the playoffs without a blink of a doubt. Like, they got some guys who can play. I mean, Arias has been absolutely insane. Jorge Soler has been very, very good. These guys are playing well. Jesus Sanchez, solid player for them this year. He's been okay. Is this the team that we're scared of, though? That's what it comes down to. From a hitting standpoint, you don't particularly feel like the Marlins are a better team, and they haven't been. You look similarly to their rotation, and the guy who is their stud, their best pitcher one of the best pitchers in baseball for a few years in a row, Sandy Alcantara, he's been bad this year. He's almost pushing a 5.0 ERA. If he's not getting it done, who is? They only got 2 guys in the 3s from their main starters right now. They got Yuri Perez, who came in. He's only started 11 games this year. He's been very, very good. But this is not a team that I'm particularly scared of. And maybe I should be. Right? Because guess what? They're 14 games above 500, and the Mets aren't even close to that. But this is not a team that I expect to run away with the wild card spot. Phillies, similarly. The Phillies are a team that can apparently hit the ball quite well. They haven't done so this year. They have a roster that can do it, but they haven't. Similarly to the Mets. You look through their roster and you say, oh, they got guys here who should be, doing a lot better here, who should be really putting more hurt on the ball. But Trey Turner's been pretty mediocre this year, for his standards at least. I mean, Trey Turner's been a lot better as of late, but he's not driving the ball, I should say, the way he has in years past. Schwarber just kind of turned it up in June, but he's still not doing much this year. Alec Bohm, JT Realmuto, these are nice players. Castellanos is their best hitter by far at this point. Bryce Harper back now. They got a team that can make a little push, that can be competitive. But if I had to rank the teams in the NL East to this point right now, the Braves are obviously number 1. You can really make the argument that the Mets should be number 2. And yeah, we could have made that argument all year, and it's meant absolutely nothing. Zero, zilch, nada. But in this second half, if they come together and play like they did in those final 2 weeks heading up to the All-Star break, they can be better than the Marlins and Phillies. The question, can they be 7, 8, 9 games better than those teams? I'm expecting a little bit of a drop-off from the Marlins. I am expecting, however, a little bit of a steady ship from the Phillies' perspective. And that's going to be the difficulty. And that's why the Mets have to play to a level that's so high that those final 10 games against the Marlins and Phillies, 13 games against the Marlins and Phillies could actually matter. If the Marlins are fluttering, if the Phillies are staying even, the Mets can play above their first half by a long shot and above their expectation to balance out this season. Now, if you put odds on if the Mets were going to make the playoffs here, it's not great. It's really not great, right? Because I'm talking about 7, 8, 9 games getting caught in the standings here against teams all ahead of them or right around them in the rankings here in the standings. Man, it's not looking great. It's not looking great for this franchise right now. For them currently to make the playoffs, they are plus 470. And frankly, I don't know if that's too low or too high. Probably sounds about right. This is an uphill battle. If you want to throw $10 to win, plus 470, knock yourself out. Odds are against them. But all we need, at least for this season, is some meaningful baseball. And I know that sounds like a cop-out, loser mentality. What are you even talking about? This season was a failure. Yes, that is correct. This season is a failure right now. But at least if this team puts together and plays some meaningful ball, we can chalk this season up to a horrendous start with terrible pitching and a horrible bullpen. And we know that the roster isn't completely broken. And why does that matter? Because when push comes to shove this offseason, if they don't make the playoffs, which they probably won't, they have to pitch to some good-time players, some big-time players, to come to New York and join the Mets. And I think their odds of landing that free agent go up tremendously if they close out this season with a chance to make the playoffs. Playing good baseball. Looking at this lineup and saying, I want to be in that lineup. Saying, I want to be the piece that's the pitcher that brings this rotation back to life. Sounds stupid, but it matters. Because a lot of these players who want to win and want to be in meaningful baseball games, they want to play for a franchise that has their together. You know what I mean? And right now the Mets don't. But there's a chance still. I still have the little bit of faith that they have some juice left to at least make a splash, put some pressure on some folks, and make the final second half of this season entertaining, exciting, with just a small chance of actually making the playoffs. On the Yankees front, they have a bit of a road ahead of them as well. They don't have quite as many games against their division, but they do have 22 remaining games against their division. The difference between the Mets and Yankees is the Yankees really have to take care of their division, because not only are the Rays running away with the division, but the Orioles are only 2 games back of the Rays, and the Blue Jays are a game up on the Yankees, and the Red Sox, the lowly Red Sox, are 1 game back of the Yankees right now. 22 games left against the AL East. 3 against the Orioles, 6 against the Rays, 7 against the Red Sox, 6 against the Blue Jays. The Orioles 3 has to be a series win. 6 against Tampa. You want to knock off, that juggernaut so far this year, where they're pitching the lights out, they're hitting the lights, they're just doing everything right. But Boston and Toronto, 7 games and 6 games. Those games are incredibly important. They're incredibly important. Blue Jays are in a wild card spot. The Red Sox are right behind. The AL East may not be up for grabs because the Rays are that good. The Orioles have been electric this year. Outkicking their coverage. They're doing the whole 9. They're going above and beyond. That doesn't mean they're going to be that way in the second half. That doesn't mean the Yankees don't have a chance here. And for all the negativity about this lineup being bad and the pitching being okay, the Yankees have another chance to make the playoffs. And I think they will. But you can't do it without taking care of your division. And on top of that, they got 7 games remaining with the Houston Astros, who are also 1 game up on them right now. Again, they may overtake the Texas Rangers and not be the ones fighting the Yankees for a wild card spot. Man, last year I looked at the NL East and said, this division's crazy. You look at the AL East this year, my goodness. 5 teams where the worst team is 5 games above 500. You look at some of the other divisions, the Central only has 2 teams above 500. The West has 3 teams above 500, but the Mariners only 1 game up. AL East is a juggernaut, man. And for all the blame we've put on the Yankees for not being equipped to handle this season, got to realize they're fighting an uphill battle right now in this division. But they have a chance to make it right, make a run, and take care of business against the O's, the Blue Jays, and the Red Sox. That's enough baseball talk, though. Because I really feel like could sit here and talk through the whole lineup for the Yankees and about every single person who's been underperforming so far this year. Because trust me, there's been a lot of them. It's been almost all of them, actually, who have been underperforming to this point. Let's be honest, right? It's Aaron Judge and who else? It ain't anybody else. You got some nice juice from Jake Bauers and Harrison Bader, who have both played less than 50 games so far, so it hasn't been enough. Got a little bit of juice out of Anthony Rizzo and Gleyber Torres, a little bit at best. But this lineup, man, it is tough sometimes, almost daily, actually, without Judge. And what's going to happen with him with the foot or the toe, he might have to be DH for the rest of the year and get surgery after the year. And guess what? He's going to have to do it, because without him, the Orioles, Blue Jays, and Red Sox are probably going to be too tough to beat, too tough to overtake. Without Judge, this lineup is rough. We've known it. We've said it. We've talked about it. Even with all the games that he's missed, he's played almost half the amount of games as the starters. Oh, he's actually played just over 50% of the games this year. Just over. He has the highest WAR on the team still. In 49 games, when Anthony Volpe's played 91 and Gleyber Torres has played 90 and Rizzo's played 84, Judge still by far has accumulated the most WAR on this team. That tells you everything you need to know about this roster right now. They ain't it. That being said, it takes getting in sometimes to make it happen. And Yankee fans don't want to hear it because they think their team's not good enough. And guess what? It might not be. But crazier things have happened in this game of baseball. Because just when you think the Yankees are a team that's going to be bad and roll over and not make the playoffs, and maybe Yankee fans kind of want that in a weird way, to get rid of Boone, to make some of those big scale changes, to actually do something new in the Bronx. The Phillies made the World Series last year, and they were not a team even close to expected to be there. The Padres were knocking at the door of the World Series last year. They were not close to the best team in their division, let alone in the NL last year. It can happen. Guys can start playing better. Giancarlo can get healthy and start playing great, and all of a sudden this lineup looks a lot better. But it takes Judge. That's a fact. And it takes taking care of the AL East, which is going to be tough. All right, let's talk about some football. The NFL is getting here. It's getting close. Like I mentioned in the open, we're going to blink and we're going to start doing fantasy drafts and betting futures for the NFL, and we're going to start talking about all this stuff a whole lot more. So it felt like a good opportunity, especially with the whole new news of the Jets going to be the Hard Knocks team. It felt like a good time to start just chipping away at these rosters for the Jets and the Giants, to think about what they can actually accomplish moving forward, what they can take care of down the line here. Because if you think about, from our perspective here as New Yorkers, as Jets and Giants fans, there is some juice, there is some buzz, there is some reason to believe with these two franchises. However, talk about the Giants for a second before we go deeper into the Jets. They're in a division with the Eagles, who are very freaking good. They are in a division with the Cowboys, who were still really good last year and are still going to be solid this year with a chance to be the best team in the NFC East. And the Commanders are not trash. Just like the Giants are not trash, the Commanders are not trash. They were 8-8-1 last year. The Giants were 9-7-1. Currently, the Giants, at their 7.5 win total, are just expected to be a game better than the Commanders at 6.5. All right, the Commanders, they're not great. We're not scared of them. I just want to make sure we understand they're not trash. The Eagles over-under is 11.5. That's probably way too low, right? Like, based off of what they accomplished last year and their run to the championship, 11.5 seems like a low number. Could be 12.5, perhaps. They're really good. The Cowboys 9.5 on their over-under, and they've been pretty much a walking 10 wins when Dak Prescott is fully healthy. That's been facts, right? Last year, they didn't even have Dak Prescott for a handful of games and got to 12 wins. So for all the excitement that Giants fans have felt, and for all the scuttlebutt about Daniel Jones and his contract and getting him weapons and bringing back Saquon, even if it's on the franchise tag, and feeling good about this team and what they accomplished last year. If you're a Giants fan and you're expecting the playoffs to be easy, I just want to warn you that it very well may not. Because you look around the whole NFL here, and there are teams who are ready to compete for the damn thing. Just in the NFC East alone, the Eagles and Cowboys are going to be a load to deal with. A load. The Vikings will still be good. The Lions are expected to be a darling of the NFL this year. They were really good last year. They almost made the playoffs themselves. Packers may not be a slouch. I don't know if I trust Jordan Love yet. We'll have to see it. The NFC South is probably the weakest division. It is the weakest division. The Bucs will probably be bad. The Panthers are going to be okay. Rookie quarterback. The Saints, we'll see what happens down in New Orleans. You never really want to count them out. They still got some talent. And the Falcons, for all intent and purpose, were not a bad team last year. But still the weakest division in the NFC. And in the West, you got the juggernaut Niners, the really good Seahawks, and the Rams that if Stafford is healthy, they have a chance to be at least noisy, right? So if you're a Giants fan and you're expecting the playoffs to be a walk in the park, an expectation, a guarantee, let me just remind you that that's not the case. Currently, the New York Giants' chances to make the playoffs, they're plus 184, which is properly priced right here on FanDuel, which is what I'm checking at the moment. Properly priced. 9-7 got them in last year. Very well may get them in this year. And they're lucky they're in the NFC, because I just went through the NFC, and there's some good teams in there. There are some teams who have serious playoff expectations. Two of them are in the Northern Division, Vikings and Lions. one of the NFC South teams, and 2 or 3 teams in the West. All have serious playoff expectations. What you don't want to be right now in the NFL is in the AFC. Unfortunately, that is a place that you really don't want to be. So let's talk about the Jets. Believe it or not, even with their win total where it is, even in the division that they are, the Jets are minus 134 to make the playoffs. Now, you could probably make an argument that part of that is because, Aaron Rodgers is in there and there's probably going to be some juice and some extra bets on the Jets. But, there's not a ton of that built in like it is on a week-to-week spread where it's the public versus the sharps and et cetera. The Jets are minus 134 for good reason, for very good reason. In fact, I think they're by far and away a better team than the New York Giants. I mean, by far and away, they have the better quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. For all you wanted to say about Aaron Rodgers last year, for all the Jets fans who said it's not worth getting him, he's going to be a distraction, he's going to be a yada, 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 he's way better than Daniel Jones, still, to this day. To this day. Right? Even with the team that he had last year, with the receivers he was throwing to last year that he didn't trust until, week 10 or whatever it was when they started playing a little bit better, Aaron Rodgers was still a top half quarterback. And yes, Daniel Jones running probably puts him squarely in the top half of quarterbacks as well in the NFL. There ain't the amount of juice from a passing perspective that he has compared to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, you look at intended air yards. Aaron Rodgers, top 15. He's number 13. Guess who's second to last? Guess who pushed the ball down the field the least amount last year? Yeah, it was Daniel Jones. It was Daniel Jones. But this is not about comparing Daniel Jones to Aaron Rodgers. This is about looking at the Jets as a team that really thinks they have a chance to make the playoffs this year. And let's be honest, Vegas thinks the Jets have a good chance to make the playoffs. Minus 134 odds to make the playoffs this year. 9.5 win total on the books right now. What does this come down to for the Jets? It comes down to a few things. First and foremost is this AFC this year is going to be a nightmare. It's a nightmare. Just listen to the team names and remember what they did just 1 year ago and how much they've either gotten better or stayed the same on to the next year. We'll start off in the AFC East. The Bills are still going to be good, right? There may be some regression. There's still some Stephon Diggs there, things to think about with what they're going to be able to accomplish if he's possibly not there, which would be surprising to me if I'm being completely honest, but it's possible. It's being talked about, whatever. The Bills are still going to be in the mix, if not the by and large favorite to win that division. The Dolphins, if Tua was healthy last year for the Dolphins, they had 9 wins with missing him for a handful of games. They probably would have won even more. They probably would have been a bigger favorite to make some noise in the playoffs. They obviously went through what they went through. Tyreek Hill, a little bit up in the air right now, but Jalen Waddle still elite. Mike McDaniel, still one of the best coaches right now in the game. And you can't even say one of the best young coaches anymore. He's one of the best coaches in the NFL. That's 2 teams in the AFC East that you're going to have to deal with, and it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a load. The Patriots, don't really trust him. They were 8-9 last year, being the most underwhelming team in the NFL, the most boring team in the NFL, but they did hire a real offensive coordinator. They got Bill O'Brien back. They got a coach to coach the offense. That's a wild concept for them to partake in there. So we'll see what happens with the Patriots. Move on to the AFC North. Golly. Remember how bad Deshaun Watson was for a couple days there? He was so bad. Deshaun Watson had a horrendous return to the NFL. He was abysmal for some time. Browns won 7 games last year. You think Deshaun Watson's going to be a little bit better this year? I do. I think he'll be a lot better, if I'm being frank. And guess what? The Browns, according to all the wizards out there, the people who look at this stuff, the PFF rankings, all the crap about the full roster, further, deeper, faster than any of us Joe Schmoes can look through their depth chart and say anything. They are considered one of the best 52 in the NFL. The Steelers will continue to be solid. They were 9-8, almost made the freaking playoffs last year. 9-8. The Ravens, even with Lamar's issues and then the question marks about the contract, They've added some talent to the offense, some desperate wide receiver help, even though their wide receiver room is not as great as I would love it to be. It's clearly, undoubtedly better than what it was last year. And Lamar Jackson got a contract, but he has a lot to prove, and he's the type of guy who wants to prove it. And that, all the AFC North teams, not counting the Bengals, who are obviously really freaking good, still really freaking talented, and are expected to be the juggernaut of that division. That's 4 teams who you can make a legitimate argument to be in the playoff conversation. And that's just one of the 4 divisions. Move on to the South. The Jaguars are probably looked at as the best team in that division, and this is easily the weakest division in the AFC, most likely to get just one playoff team through. You know, the Titans are kind of in a rut here. The Colts, don't trust them. They have to do a lot to prove otherwise. Texans got a rookie quarterback. Even if there's some upgrades and some juice in the Texans roster, listen, they're not going to be a playoff team just yet, and that's okay. Then you get back to the old AFC West, and you got the Chiefs, and you got the Chargers, who are 2 of the best teams, if not the 2 best teams in the AFC. Right there, one of them is going to win the division, and one of them is most likely going to be making the playoffs. You got the Raiders and the Broncos. The Raiders got Jimmy G. I don't know. Josh McDaniels, I don't trust him. I don't think he's a very, very good coach. They lost 3 in a row to end the year last year. Their roster's okay. The Broncos are going to be interesting, though. The Broncos will actually be interesting this year because they bring in Sean Payton, a guy who is a proven winner in this league, who is not going to take any crap from Russell Wilson saying he wants to do this, wants to do that. Russell Wilson was terrible last year. He doesn't have that many legs to stand on. We know they got some talent to catch the ball. We know they got some talent to run the ball. Javonte Williams should be back to run the ball for him this year. Broncos could be interesting. That's really important when you think about this Jets season. The AFC is elite. Every team right now that's in the NFC is taking their blessings and counting them day and night that they don't have to deal with the AFC right now. And you look through the Jets' schedule this year, and guess who they have to play from the NFC? They got to play the NFC East. Okay, so that means they play the Cowboys and the Eagles. In the first 6 weeks of the season, they play the Cowboys and the Eagles. Guess who else they play in the first 6 weeks of the season? They got the Bills on opening night, Monday Night Football, which is September 11th against the Bills. That'll be a tough game. Yeah, of course, maybe they can win it. Then they got the Cowboys, the Patriots, which will never be easy, the Chiefs, the Broncos, who I do expect to be better this year, and the Eagles. Right off the jump, 6 games, none of them a give me. None of them are going to be the Jets favored by more than 3 points. Even if the Jets somehow blow out the Bills, blow out the Cowboys, and blow out the Eagles, which is not going to happen. I'm sorry, the Patriots, which is not going to happen anyway. They still got the Chiefs, Denver, and Philly. At best, you're getting 3.5 points at Denver. Maybe, probably not even, right? So for all this talk about the Jets and their chances to make the playoffs and play for the division and be one of these juggernauts, right now, my guess on the first 6 weeks of the season, they will be favored at home against the New England Patriots and maybe 1.5 point favorites at the Denver Broncos, which also, again, I think the Broncos could be better this year. So who knows by week 5 what we're looking at there. But you're not going to be favored against the Bills, the Cowboys, the Chiefs, or the Eagles. Guaranteed. 4 underdog performances in the first 6 weeks. Then you get the Giants, the Chargers, you get the Commanders down the road. Obviously, you play the whole AFC East another time or twice for the Dolphins' sake. This is going to be a tough year. Where's the easy matchups in the Jets' schedule? Where is it? And yeah, of course, sitting here today in the middle of July, we don't know. We do this every year. We look at the schedule and you say, that's a win, that's a win, that's a loss, that's a tough loss, that's a win, that's a win. We don't know. If they play the Falcons in week 13, Falcons might be trash. Jets might be trash by then too. Okay? Right? So it is incredibly important for you guys as Jets fans to properly manage these expectations. If you think this team is going to roll into a 12-win season, a 13-win season, I urge you to look at the schedule. I urge you to look at the division. I urge you to see who they're playing on the NFC side of things. Because the Cowboys and the Eagles and the Giants and the Commanders, none of those are easy games. Commanders might be absolute trash by week 16, which is when the Jets play them, and that's a good thing. That's a possible chip in the cap there for the Jets. This is not going to be easy, but more importantly, across all that, let's think about the Jets roster. Because the Jets roster is freaking good. And that's why, for all the pouring of water I just did on all you Jets fans out there for why you should, manage your expectations properly, I also think it's incredibly valid for Jets fans to sit here with some confidence, to sit here and say, we have a reason to believe we can play for the AFC East, or we can play for an AFC wildcard with confidence. I mean, look at this roster. If Breece Hall is back and looks anything like he did in the first couple weeks of the season last year, you got your stud running back. And you look at the receiving core, you got Garrett Wilson, who's the best guy on the bunch. You got Lazard and Cobb, who obviously Aaron Rodgers trusts a ton. You got Mecole Hardman, who I have a feeling Rodgers won't trust a ton, right? But he can make some plays. Corey Davis, Denzel Mims, Tyler Conklin, CJ Uzomah, right? These are guys. These are players who can make a difference, who can make big-time plays, who you can imagine become trustworthy to Aaron Rodgers. There's obviously question marks on the offensive line. Mekhi Becton's injury concerns, all that stuff. Elijah Vera Tucker's back. He was very good last year when he went down. That was a huge blow to their season. So there's reason to believe in this offense. But the number one thing for the Jets right now is that their defense still looks like it should be an elite level defense. For how bad they were last year offensively, they were almost as good on the opposite end of the spectrum defensively. They were one of the best defenses in the league. The only reason they got to 7 wins was because of that defense. They still got all those dudes. They still got a bunch of guys who are going to wreak havoc. And they got Sauce Gardner in year 2 and DJ Reed in year 2, Whitehead and Amos in the safety positions. Up and down the roster on defense, CJ Mosley, Quinnen Williams, Carl Lawson, Quentin Jefferson, John Franklin Myers. These are guys, household names, dudes who were a part of a great defense last year, who should be a part of a great defense again this year. And that leads me to my last point in the Jets. I don't know if a lot of you Jets fans are doing this Hard Knocks thing just to kind of emotionally hedge and save yourself from hurt of expectations for this season. But if you think that the Hard Knocks crew being at their training camp is the reason that the Jets have a kiss of death, let me tell you something. You are already losing. The Jets are already out if that's what you think will be the thorn in the side of this Jets season. Kevin Clark on The Ringer on Ryan Russillo podcast just brought this up last week about distractions, right? Said basically every team in the league has distractions, but the teams that are good overcome them, push them to the side, and just move past it, right? You have professionals here on the Jets. You have a roster of proven talent on the defensive side. You have a quarterback who's been through it all, who's been a walking distraction by himself. By himself. For 4 or 5 years, he's been a distraction in Green Bay. And what has he done in those past 4 or 5 years? He's won 2 MVPs. He's been electric and still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Last year, that Packers team was not good. Their receiving core was bad. It got better as Dobbs and Watson kind of grew into themselves in the later portion of the season, but their offensive line was bad. Their run game finally got cooking as they committed to it better. We don't really know how good of a coach Matt LaFleur is, to be quite honest, because Aaron Rodgers was putting that team on its back for 2 years prior. Their defense was okay. Their special teams was terrible, whatever. Aaron Rodgers is above distractions. He's above that. If you think that Hard Knocks is going to be the reason why Aaron Rodgers falls apart this year, I just don't know what to tell you. If this team is as good as so many of you fans think it is, which I actually lean towards believing, this should not be a distraction. This should be so exciting. This should be one of the things that you look forward to most as a Jets fan, to see the inner workings of your franchise. To see if your coach, Robert Saleh, is the guy you actually believe to lead this franchise, which there's mixed opinions at this point. But his thing is defense, and guess what? The defense was freaking good last year. The offense was horrible because they had a horrible quarterback situation. Guess what they fixed? Quarterback situation. Guess what they get back? Elite level running back. Guess what they get back? Elite level offensive lineman in Elijah Vera Tucker and possibly Mekhi Becton. You think Hard Knocks is going to ruin this season? No, not the case. What ruins the Jets season, other than injury, which you can say about every team, is the AFC just being better. Just being too difficult to get over the hump. And you might say, well, that's why you shouldn't have traded for Aaron Rodgers. That's why you should have done something else. You should have went for so-and-so. You should have stuck with Mike White. Yeah, you could have. Then what? You're super mediocre this year. You still win some games. You don't get a top pick. You don't get the big-time quarterback out of USC because you're not going to be bad enough to get that low in the draft. This team's too good. This team's ready to make noise. Not guaranteeing it. I'm not saying it's a thing that we can chalk up and say, 11 wins for the Jets in a playoff berth. The biggest obstacle they have is not Hard Knocks. It's not Aaron Rodgers. It's not distractions. It's the AFC's really freaking good. And every single team in the AFC right now, every single team, except for the Chiefs and the Bengals, should be thinking the exact same thing. And I include the Buffalo Bills in that category. Because the Bills are at this point now where it's a little make or break for them. Not because of Josh Allen and his health or his performance or et cetera. It's because Josh Allen's contract's going to kick in. And it's because paying all the players that they're paying right now and their defense being as good as it was and as talented as it was, it's going to be a lot harder to keep it that way. And they had some flaws last year. For as good as they were, as dominant as they were against all the bad teams, they weren't dominant at all times against all the good teams, right? So they're pedestrian enough. The Dolphins, they should be nervous to be in the AFC. The Ravens, Steelers, Browns should be pissed they're in the AFC. The Jaguars should be blessed that they're in the AFC South. But the Chargers, the Raiders, the Broncos, all these teams, you say, God, only if I could be in the freaking NFC North or the NFC South or the NFC West, man, I'd have such a good chance to make the playoffs. It's going to be tough out here, dude. It's going to be really difficult for all these teams. So my point is this. When you think about this Jets season, don't think about Hard Knocks, driving a wrench in the system and being a distraction and all these negative things that are just stupid distractions that shouldn't matter when you have a team with this talent, with a quarterback that's been through it all. Just be nervous about the team ahead of you. Just take serious considerations of the team ahead of you. That's the only difficulty here. That's the main thing that's going to make this Jets season tough. It's not that Aaron Rodgers sucks and is washed up. It's not that Hard Knocks crew was causing some rifts in the organization. It's that you have to play Buffalo and Miami twice. You got to play the Chiefs and the Cowboys and the Eagles and the Chargers and the Broncos. That's the tough part. You got to get the AFC West. You got to get the NFC East. And then you got your own division. Those are the three toughest divisions in football. That's it. Don't be nervous about Hard Knocks. I don't want to hear that anymore. It's kind of a fun joke, I guess, right? It's like the old Mets joke from Family Guy. Here's the first pitch of the season, and the season's over. That's what the Jets fans are doing right now. That's exactly what the Jets fans are doing. Oh, man, we're going to be on Hard Knocks. That's obviously going to be terrible, and we're going to suck now. What? Defense is elite. Got Aaron Rodgers, an elite group of skill players with an offensive line that has some potential here. Let's not give up before it starts. But let's not also say they're going to win the division and win 13 games, right? So let's be reasonable here, Jets fans, all right? On to the Giants front. Similarly to the Giants, they have to play the AFC East, right? So the Giants fans out there who are confident in Daniel Jones, which is not all of them. Let's make that abundantly clear. It is definitely not all of them who think that the Giants are going to be set because they got Daniel Jones now for good. We're making sure that that's not an understanding thing, a belief that's widespread across the nation here, right? A lot of people still do not believe in Daniel Jones. But there is a pretty good reason why the New York Giants are plus 750 to win the NFC East. Plus 750. First thing is because the Eagles are awesome. I hate to say it, but it's true. Jalen Hurts is awesome. A.J. Brown is awesome. Devonta Smith is awesome. Their coach is awesome. Their defense is awesome. It got better. Somehow a team that made it to the Super Bowl outdrafted everybody, added some talent here and there, still has an elite quarterback, still has elite skill players, still has a great offensive line, still has a great defensive line. Eagles are freaking great, dude. Yeah, that's true. All right, so the Giants have to play them twice, obviously. The Cowboys are freaking good. They're very good, actually. Cowboys made some nice little moves here and there. They were a 12-win team last year. They're solid. They're solid. They're solid. That's tough. Commanders, not a gimme again. And then you remember that the Giants, just like the Jets, have to play the AFC East. So what does that mean? You get in week 5, 6, and 8, the Dolphins, Bills, and Jets. 3 very difficult games. And they're lucky because they play the NFC West, at least luckier than the Jets, because that means they get the Cardinals, which is obviously a winnable game. They get the Niners, which is very tough. But they get the Seahawks, which is winnable, though tough. And they get the Rams, which who knows where they'll be at in week 17. So almost opposite of the Jets here. You look at the Giants' schedule, and you could actually pick off a couple more wins. And that 7.5 number for their over-under feels a little bit more reasonable to attack. Again, the Dallas Cowboys and the Eagles will be absolutely really difficult to beat, let alone twice. Maybe you can split with the Cowboys. The Eagles are a juggernaut. Thankfully, you play them in Week 18, and maybe they'll be benching the whole squad at that point, right? You can actually, I feel confident enough to say that. In Week 18, there's better chance that the Eagles are just benching their entire team because they already clinched the 1 seed in the NFC, right? But the Giants' schedule is a lot more reasonable than the Jets. A lot more reasonable. Jets are a better team. Jets have better talent. Jets have a better quarterback and a better defense. But the Giants' schedule is easier. Winnable games that I think the Giants will be favored for, or like looking at the season now. They'll be favored against Arizona. They're home against Seattle, so they'll be a slight favorite there. They'll be favored against the Commanders at home. The Jets, they'll be underdogs, by the way. They can be slightly favored against the Raiders, again against the Commanders. Perhaps it's at Washington, so who knows? They can be favored at home against New England, Green Bay, New Orleans, and the Rams again in Week 17. Just off the bat, winnable games here for the Giants. But they have to step up. They have to prove that they did enough to bring in some talent to this receiving core. Because right now, Isaiah Hodgins, as their number 1, yeah, he had a great second half last year. But are we going to be saying the same exact thing as we did last year when Daniel Jones is hitting people in the chest across the middle and Slayton's dropping passes and Wan'Dale Robinson's not on the field enough and Jamison Crowder's being leaned upon? Sterling Shepard's out again. Golly. Maybe the Paris Campbell ad is something nice, but he's number 3. There's still no number 1 on this team. Number 1 is still Saquon. Maybe you can argue it's Darren Waller. I hope it is. Darren Waller and Daniel Bellinger, a great tight end room. That sounds great. But what I'm afraid of is that we, again, look at the stats, the advanced statistics for NFL passing, and we look at accuracy, and you go to drops, and guess who had, not drops, on target last year? Guess who had the best on target percentage last year in the NFL? It was Daniel Jones. Number 2 was Aaron Rodgers. But guess who had the most drops in the league last year? It was Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. The most drops in the league. And also top 10 in that category was Daniel Jones. Giants fans know what we're talking about here. Okay? So again, for all the excitement that exists around the Giants right now, with Dexter Lawrence back and Leonard Williams back and Kayvon Thibodeau in year 2 and Dory Jackson and Xavier McKinney. There's some good players here. Defense can be solid. We still trust Brian Daboll to do what he does on offense. There's still questions on the offensive line. There's still questions at wide receiver. Can they be good enough? I don't know. My guess is they're an 8-win team. 8-9. That's what I see for the New York Giants. I think there's a lot of Giants fans out there who are building up an expectation for this team based off what they did last year, expecting them to be better. I don't think they got better in enough places to compete in that division and truly to compete in the NFC. There's a chance. There's definitely a chance for them to make the playoffs again this year. But I can't imagine them pushing past 10 wins. That's something that seems unfathomable to me. Part of it is because Daniel Jones not being elite. Part of it is because he will never be elite, especially without the wide receiver talent that exists on this team, or does not exist on this team, I should say. And the defense is decent. Decent. Not great. Hardly good. Just decent. Uphill battle for the New York Giants. And there's a little NFL talk. Because what happens in the NFL a lot, and I'm almost done here. What happens in the NFL a lot is you look at the year prior and you expect things to automatically get better. And for a team, if they won 9 last year and there's some young guys on the roster, now they're going to win 11. It's not how the NFL works. It also goes in the opposite direction where there's teams who won 12 games last year who fall flat on their face, right? There's teams that, like the Vikings last year, who for a 13-4 team had a negative point differential and lost in the first round of the playoffs. And guess what? I expect them to win 10 games again this year, right? But they're probably not going to win 13. But the Lions get better and some other teams get better. And I just don't think the Giants got enough improvements across this roster to make us feel confident that Daniel Jones with a new contract is going to push this team over a hump. The hump is still not there yet for this squad. That's all we got. Subway Sports Talk. My name is Peter Kennedy. Thank you for listening, as always, to Subway Sports Talk on Apple Podcasts, app, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate you a ton. And I hope you enjoyed a little bit of NFL banter. That's really all it was. It was just thinking about this stuff out loud, giving ourselves a chance to start to comprehend what this NFL season is going to look like. Because, man, there's a lot of things that changed for a lot of teams this year. You know, it wasn't the biggest quarterback offseason where like a ton of big name quarterbacks changed teams here, but you got no more Brady. You got Jimmy G in Las Vegas. You obviously got Aaron Rodgers in New York with the Jets now. You got a Lamar Jackson contract. You got Deshaun back in now, his second year returning. You get one more year of Geno Smith. You got some rookie quarterbacks. You know, there are things that are moving and shaking in this league. And obviously I haven't done my full research on the entire NFL just yet, but I have a feeling we're going to start looking at these teams and say, wow, there's a depth of talent in this league right now where it's kind of hard to pinpoint who is the bottom of tier 1. Because I still think it's pretty easy to pinpoint the top of tier 1, and that would be the Eagles, Chiefs, and Bengals. And maybe there'll be a Niners surge there down out in San Francisco because they're always freaking good. 13-4 last year with who knows who playing quarterback. Their defense is fantastic. Their coach is fantastic. They just do what they got to do. But that second tier and that bottom of tier 1, there's so many good teams, man. The Dolphins and Jets, the Ravens, Steelers, Browns, the Jaguars, the Chargers and Broncos, the Cowboys, the Giants perhaps, the Lions, the Vikings, the Saints, Niners, Seahawks. A lot of teams walking into the season expecting playoffs, thinking they have a chance to make some splashes. Giants are one of those teams. The Jets are one of those teams. But by no means should they be looked at as a guarantee to be one of those teams. That's all I'm saying. We'll do more football as we get closer to it. That's all we got. Thank you for listening. My name is Pete Kennedy. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review on your Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as follow us on social, Subway Sports Talk, Instagram and TikTok, Subway Sports Talk TLK on Twitter, and maybe we'll do threads. Maybe we'll do threads. I don't know. Who's to say? Not me. Actually, it is me. That's all we got. Cheers.